Welcome. This week we're going to be looking at purpose, audience, and writing style. Our learning objectives are just that. We're going to look at a variety of rhetorical strategies and adapt each to purpose, audience, and genre. And we're going to be looking at the invention component of the writing process or the pre writing process. So, when you begin writing, and I like this little it's a little big here for the screen, but this little graphic here, when you're choosing your topic and as you're writing about it, you need to look at your purposes. For example, you write about something because you love it, you're passionate about it. You write about something because you're great at it, it's something you've done for many years. You write about it because it is your vocation. It's something you are paid to do. You write about something, sorry, I'm not able to get it to come over here, but you write about it because it's something the world needs to know. So you need to think whenever you write something, you should always ask yourself, why am I writing this? What is my purpose? So let's just look at a few examples and analyze what the purpose of the writing is. So as you read these examples with me, I want you to think, why do you think this piece of writing was written? Anyway, now what was the author's purpose in writing this? And how does the author achieve this purpose? What are some of the other purposes for writing? So let's look at example one. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So let's just look at a few sentences of this. This is just an excerpt from an essay, and this is a student essay. So, it's not been peer reviewed or anything like that. It's not from a professional magazine. This is just an average student writing this. Example 1. Gaining self-confidence is probably one of the most important advantages a person can gain from plastic surgery. Despite common opinion, a wish to surgically correct one's appearance may not necessarily be dictated by dysmorphophobia, a psychological condition when a person is obsessed with imaginary or real defects in their appearance, but can be a rational and conscious decision. Some people have physical features that have a recognizable impact on their daily lives, such as cleft lips, skull deformations, excessive pigmentation, and so on. So let's just stop there for the sake of time, but what do you think the purpose of this writing is? As I look at this, I see, just from the first line, that the topic is, it looks like, advantages of plastic surgery, right? And then the author gives a contradicting common opinion. So here she says, some people, or the common opinion is that, people who get plastic surgery, it's a psychological condition. But, like we see this but here, this looks like this is going to be their purpose or what they're trying to persuade the reader. But plastic surgery can be a rational and conscious decision. So, looking at some of these different things that have been stated, I would say, the topic is plastic surgery, and it looks like the purpose is to persuade the common opinion, to persuade people to see plastic surgery and its advantages and not just see it as the product of a psychological condition or, something that people just do for fun. So, is that the same purpose that you got out of it? Because if you got a different idea or different purposes out of that, then, every reader goes into reading something with their own background and with their own way of thinking. But the writer has to work really hard to portray their purpose, their ideas, so that they don't get confused in those different readers. So let's look at the second example. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that expressed that all people deserve life, liberty, and the freedom of thought. It is the responsibility of the government to protect these rights since the individual entrusts themselves to the ruling body. But in Evgeny Zamyatin's We and George Orwell's 1984, the governments of one state and Oceania deny their citizens these basic rights, resulting in totalitarian societies. Okay, so we'll stop right there. What is the purpose of this writing? Is it to persuade? Is it to inform? What are some of the purposes that you're getting from this? So I'm seeing, as I look at this, I see three different documents that have been mentioned right off the bat here. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then we have two novels. We have We and 1984. And so looking at this, it looks to me that, and we have, the One State and the Oceania are from the two different novels. It looks to me like this author is going to be comparing and contrasting these two novels using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as kind of the measuring stick or the medium on which they're comparing and contrasting these two novels. And so we're going to look at these two novels and see how they address human rights and how they show the upholding of basic human rights. And so, again, is that something that you see as a purpose of this writing? All right, here's our last example. Autumn was already in the air, and I was thinking about how cruel the world was and how impossible it was to be happy in it. It is not that I was broken-hearted, but I thought that my patience has come to its end. I looked at the blue sky and sat at a bench. I was sitting there and thinking about how I want to be another person. Eventually, I realized that my main problem was that I felt that I could not overcome all the love obstacles that life made me face. I recalled everything I have read in books about love as well as everything that I have experienced myself. Okay, so let's stop there. So, what kind of writing is this? What is the purpose of this writing? So, I'm looking at some of these characteristics of the writing. For example, you see the word I in the pronouns. The pronoun that's used the most is I. I was thinking, I was brokenhearted, I thought, I looked, I was, I want, I felt, I recalled. And so the personal pronoun tells me that this is probably a personal piece of writing. And also, it seems a little less informal. The words are less formal, and, or sorry, it seems more informal. And anyway, so we look at some of these verbs: thinking, looked, realized, felt, recalled. So this sounds to me like a memoir piece of writing or a personal narrative or a reflection of some sort, a personal reflection, or maybe a journal entry even. And so the purpose of this, I think, is just for the author to reflect. It sounds like the author is reflecting on love. So, in this person even says, my main thought was how people can possibly spend their whole life together. So, this person's reflecting on everlasting love and couples and things like that. And so, different purposes are going to have different styles of writing and are going to use different techniques and strategies for that piece of writing. And so, let me just go back up here. You need to consider your purpose and the purpose of the assignment. Is the purpose to explain, to persuade, to entertain, to show what you've learned, to evaluate, to learn about a topic, to communicate ideas? As you think about your final essay that you're writing, what is your purpose? Is it to express or reflect, to inquire and explore, to analyze and evaluate, to take a stand, to evaluate and judge, to propose a solution or seek common ground, to inform or explain? Sometimes your writing may have multiple purposes. And so you need to always think about that purpose. And this is an important note. Notice that none of the purposes listed above were to get a good grade or to get the assignment completed. I know that's kind of a given purpose whenever we do an assignment, is we want to get a good grade and we want to complete the assignment on time. And while those are good things, if that is your sole purpose in writing, your writing will fall flat and not be authentic or powerful. So you should always write with a clear purpose. Before you begin writing your essay, make a list of questions about your topic. Maybe these are questions that you still have about your topic, and also you can anticipate what are some questions that your audience might have. And after you make this list, label what kind of writing would be required to answer your questions. What stands out? Do you see a clear purpose emerging? So I really like this example, and I'll probably give it numerous times throughout this semester. But imagine two people are standing outside of a movie theater, enthusiastically discussing a movie they just saw. You walk up to them and say, I saw a movie once. What happens next? What would be the reaction? Cue awkward moment, awkward silence. What would the other two people think? You're on topic, right? Like they're talking about movies, you're talking about movies. So what's the problem? The problem is you didn't add to the conversation. Every time you write, you need to add to the conversation. As you think about your topic, what is the conversation? What is being said about your topic? What needs to be said? How are you going to add to the conversation? For example, if you are writing about diabetes and your audience is people who have dealt with diabetes most of their life, then your audience doesn't want just a general overview of diabetes. They already know more about diabetes than they wish they had to know. But if you write about what current research has discovered about diabetes or possible cures, that might be of interest and add to the conversation. Or if you write a persuasive essay concerning the rising price of insulin, now we're talking. You need to think about your topic and think about what are the conversations and how am I going to add to that. And another important component, this goes right into this, audience. Audience matters. Audience is so important. Before you begin writing, as you're writing, and after you write, you need to keep thinking about that audience. And I used my little Pumbaa here from Disney's The Lion King. Timon tells him, hey, Pumbaa, not in front of the kids. We need to be aware of our audience, right? You need to be able to write for a variety of audiences, and you need to analyze who your audience might be every time you write, whether formally or informally, including emails, texts, social media, memos, etc. Always be aware of your audience. I honestly believe that this is one of the keys to world peace. If people were more aware of their audiences before posting or responding to things on social media or news outlets, things like that, I really think we would have more peace in this world. Sometimes with a writing assignment, you will have more than one audience. You may be asked to write to a specific audience in an assignment, but you need to be aware of the teacher as an audience also. So maybe for your final essay, you will be writing for other nurses. However, you need to be aware that your instructor, myself, will be reading this essay also and grading it. And I might not know all the acronyms that nurses use. I might not know what some of these things mean that maybe a nurse would understand. So just take a quick second and define terms the first time you use them. Just a general awareness that the instructor is there. But really, as an audience, I should be the second audience. Okay, as an instructor, I want to be the second audience. I want you to focus on a different audience. So, you need to be thinking about what your readers' needs are. And I love this information. This is from the University of North Carolina. How do I identify my audience and what they want from me? Before you begin the process of writing, take some time to consider who your audience is and what they want from you. And so here's some questions to help you think about your audience. Who is your audience? Might you have more than one audience? We talked about that. Does your assignment itself give any clues about your audience? Sometimes a very specific assignment will. What does your audience need? What do they want? What do they value? What is most important to them? What are they least likely to care about? So remember that example with the diabetes? Someone with diabetes does not want to read an encyclopedia like essay that just gives a general overview. This is what diabetes is. These are the symptoms. I know all of that if I have diabetes. What do people with diabetes care about? What do they value? What is important to them? What's going to keep them reading your essay? What kind of organization would best help your audience understand and appreciate your argument? What do you have to say, or what are you doing in your research that might surprise your audience? That's always good. You don't want to just tell your audience everything that they already know. You want to add to it, right? What do you want your audience to think, learn, or assume about you? What impression do you want your writing or your research to convey? And this just goes to show the audience and purpose go hand in hand. When you're writing, you've got that audience, you've got a strong audience, you're like, this is who I'm writing for. Then what's your purpose? What do you want your reader to walk away from your essay with? What do you want them to do, to think? All right. So like this says here, this can actually help your writing process. Imagining a person or group or a set of characteristics can often help to generate writing that just looking at a blank page cannot. In other words, thinking about a specific audience can actually help you to write. Whenever you get writer's block, it happens to the best of writers. Whenever you get that writer's block where you're just like, I don't know where to go with this, I don't know what to say about this topic, go to that audience, and that's going to help you generate ideas. Thinking about a specific audience helps improve writing as the writer considers how do you want the reader to read your writing? What do you want the reader to gain from reading this? Why should the reader care about what you're writing about? So this is actually an e-textbook that you can actually download the entire textbook if you click on this link. We will use it here and there. And pages 17 through 23 give you an in-depth look at audience. And so I love this look at what is an audience. All audiences, whether viewing a movie, reading a book, watching an advertisement, or listening in a classroom, expect the same things. So here are audience expectations: to learn something, to be entertained, to feel that whoever is delivering the message knows what he or she or they are talking about, to feel their time is not being wasted, to clearly receive the information they thought they were going to receive. In writing, this means that we all agree that we want something that's clean in terms of formatting, like font sizes don't suddenly change sizes. It's easy to read in terms of grammar, punctuation, and spelling. It's organized well and making a clear and interesting, funny, useful point. Different audiences will warm to different styles. Some audiences will expect to see evidence of detailed and careful research. So remember, your audience for your final essay, you need to also remember that academic audience that's going to want detailed and careful research. However, not all audiences like the same thing. So here's some things that might change what the audience is expecting: age, race, gender, personality, socioeconomic status, morals, education level, where we're from, what part of the country or what country, urban, rural, politics, religion. There are so many different aspects to us that go into our reading and our understanding, and we need to be aware of that with our audience. This is why there are so many different magazines in the world. Sure, anyone can pick up a magazine and read it, but publishers of magazines always have a target audience in mind. You can think of a variety of magazines and imagine what their target audience might be. The audience for Field and Stream is very different than the audience for Cosmopolitan, and much different than Dollhouse and Miniatures magazine. This isn't an accident. So these magazines, they are targeting a specific audience. Or you think about advertisements. I always wonder how, when I'm watching Netflix or Hulu, how they know exactly what commercials to show me, what advertisements to show me that will address me specifically. But I know that there's a lot of things that they can do technologically to target their audiences, and there are a lot of things that you can do as a writer to target your audience. So you should always have your audience in mind, and the more you know about your audience, the better decisions you make in your writing. So I like this example. For example, let's say you want to use a television show about aliens to explain how humans view the unknown. If your audience grew up in the 1950s through the 1970s, you might use The Twilight Zone as an example. If your audience came of age in the 1980s or 1990s, The X-Files is probably more appropriate. And for a contemporary audience, you could use Stranger Things. So, just age can make a difference in your audience. Like some of you might be thinking, I've never even heard of the X Files, I've never heard of the Twilight Zone. But you need to, or maybe some of us are thinking, I've never heard of Stranger Things. So it just depends on who your audience is and really recognizing what they need and thinking as much as you can about your audience. You can even brainstorm, like put your audience in the middle and do a mind map or cluster about your audience so that you can be sure to address what they need. So, one thing you don't want to do is think about your audience as a group of people you are addressing as a letter. Don't write an essay that starts with something like, single mothers, this essay is for you. Nope. In fact, don't mention the audience at all in the essay itself. Simply consider what they know already and what they need to know, and don't spend a bunch of time on stuff they already know. Spend more time on what they need to know. All right, so now we're going to talk about writing with style. So, and I love this little comic because this is actually pretty close to home sometimes. So, my writing style: think carefully about each word before typing it, keeps pressing random buttons and hopes something coherent comes out, especially when it's last minute, right? So, let's talk about writing with style. So far, we've just been splashing around with academic writing, but now it's time to dive into writing with style. You could just jump into your writing and hope you don't belly flop, or with a little preparation and some great strategies, you can execute a perfect swan dive with style. So, let's talk about continuity. And we're going to, and all of these come from the APA manual. So, continuity in presentation of ideas. Continuity means how well your writing flows together. The better continuity in your writing, the better your reader will understand your ideas. All right, so you want to picture your writing as though it is a paved road. And you don't want little things to get in there. You don't want little potholes. You don't want rocks. You don't want things that will get in the way of your reader. You want it to be a smooth journey for your reader. Continuity can be influenced by the organization of ideas, paragraph fluency, sentence structure, and use of punctuation. And so something I like to compare it to, let's look here. So when we start talking about paragraphs, imagine all of your paragraphs are on a relay team. Have you ever watched, like in the Olympics, you watch a relay team and you see how important and how smooth those the passing of the baton is, right? On those relay teams. What happens if someone drops the baton? Are they going to get the gold medal? No. And so you need to think of your paragraphs as these little runners, and one paragraph needs to pass the baton to the next paragraph, and it needs to be smooth and work together to get your paper to the finish line in the best way possible. So when do you start a new paragraph? Do paragraphs transition smoothly from one paragraph to another? If not, how can you help your paragraphs flow together more smoothly? So we start a new paragraph when you start a new idea, right? That's the basic understanding. I know I've read a couple of essays in my time as an instructor where they had no paragraphs at all. That is a bumpy road because as a reader, it's overwhelming and you don't know how the ideas are flowing, and it's too overwhelming for your reader. So you want your paragraphs to be relatively short, and you want them just to transition from one paragraph to the next as you transition from one idea to the next. And one way you can do this is to use transitional words and phrases, such as time links, like then, next, after, while, since, etc. Use cause-effect links, therefore, consequently, as a result, etc. Or contrast links, but conversely, nevertheless, however, although, etc. So you can use, and there are so many transitional. Here's a chart with a bunch of transition words and phrases that you can use to help your paragraphs pass that baton from one paragraph to the other. Another thing that you want to look at is your sentence fluency. Sentences have power. For example, if you wanted to get a job and put me as a reference, which would you rather I say? Although he's a hard worker, he usually turns his work in late. Although he usually turns his work in late, he is a hard worker. Now, both of those sentences have the same words. They're just arranged in a different order. Which sentence would you rather I say? Most people would say the second one. Although he usually turns his work in late, he is a hard worker. Why is that? If you look at it, just looking at the sentence from a psychological viewpoint, you kind of want the last thing said to stick in the employer's mind, right? So, okay, yeah, he usually turns his work in late, but he's a hard worker. Like that sounds like I am arguing on your behalf. But he's a hard worker, but he usually turns his work in late. That sounds like I'm criticizing. I'm saying, you know what, he's a hard worker, but this is an issue. He turns his work in late. So, how you say things can have a huge influence on what you are saying. So, in your essay, you need to look at your sentences. Did I use complete sentences? Complete sentences must have a subject and a verb. Every complete sentence must have a subject and a verb. I ran, you ran, they ran. Okay, those are complete sentences because they have a subject and a verb. Do my sentences begin in different ways? And a great way to look at this, like on the last point, says, does my paper sound smooth as I listen to it? Read your paper aloud. Listen as someone else reads your paper aloud. How does it sound? So if you're reading your essay aloud and you hear every sentence starts out the same way, that can get kind of heavy for the reader. It's like, ugh, boring. Like, give me some spice here, right? Did I use long and some short sentences? You want to have a little bit of variation because, if you had all sentences, listen to how this would sound. I ran, I ate, I slept, I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I, you know, I've got the same beginning and they're all the same length and it's just choppy and does not flow. However, with APA writing, you want your sentences to be concise. Okay, politicians, they love to do big, long sentences, like legal speak, like these big, long sentences with lots of big words so that you get kind of muddled up in the middle. We're not trying to muddle up our reader. We're trying to be concise and portray our topic in an effective way. And so, for the most part in APA writing, you want to have shorter sentences. You don't want to have a sentence that is almost the whole paragraph on its own, okay? That's too long. So sometimes you want to just break those sentences up a little bit and shorten them up. Also, like the same with paragraphs. You don't want big, huge paragraphs. You want nice, condensed, concise paragraphs. And so I like to compare sentence fluencies like good music. There are different styles, but there should always be a good flow and a good sound to it. All right, let's talk a little bit about active voice versus passive voice. Perhaps in high school, you had a teacher, an English teacher, who kept saying you're using passive voice, and she would circle it with her red pen. But a lot of people don't understand the difference between active and passive voice. Active voice is something like the storm uprooted huge pine trees. Okay, so the subject, the storm, is right here at the beginning and is taking ownership of that sentence. Here's our verb, uprooted, and this is what's being acted upon. Passive voice, and with passive voice, you're going to use a form of to be, was, will be, has been, were, plus the past participle of the main verb. So, huge pine trees were uprooted by the storm. Generally, a past participle will have the ed on it. So, here's some other examples. He was questioned. He has been questioned. He will be questioned. These are all passive. Okay? Most writers use active voice as much as possible. It is generally easy to understand and remember, and it's just strong writing. However, passive voice is used sometimes to avoid taking responsibility. For example, a politician might say a mistake was made rather than saying I made a mistake. Or in technical or scientific writing, if the writer wants to highlight what is being studied rather than the writer or the researcher. So the writer might say the participants' food intake was closely monitored because the writer wants the participants' food intake to be in the driver's seat. So if that's not the case, you could say, I monitored the participants' food intake, so that puts it into the passenger seat. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how do you express emotion in your writing. So I will tell you right now that APA writing and academic writing does not use emojis. You probably should not use emojis in your final essay. But punctuation can help to give the reader a sense of emotion. For instance, punctuation marks contribute to continuity by showing relationships between ideas. They cue the reader to pauses, inflections, subordination, and pacing normally heard in speech. Neither overuse or underuse any type of punctuation, such as commas or dashes. Overuse may annoy the reader, underuse may confuse. And that's a very important point right there. Overuse may annoy the reader. So if you have commas after every other word and it just doesn't make sense why the commas are even there, that's going to be annoying for the reader. It's going to be distracting. But if you don't use any periods at all in your essay, it's going to be very confusing to understand what the message is. All right, so let's go back here. So let's also look at smoothness of expression. Scientific prose and creative writing are very different. All right, with APA writing, try not to get too poetic. APA format prefers concise, logical, and to the point writing. Watch out for shifts in verb tense, noun strings, and anything that might make your writing sound choppy. Read your writing aloud and listen to how it sounds. Step away from your writing. This requires working on your writing long before it's due. So if you are writing an essay that's due that night, you're not going to have time to do half of these things. You need to work on it well in advance in order to do effective strategies. So you walk away from it, and a couple of days later, read your draft again. This will give you some distance so that you can see with new eyes. Have someone else, a friend, a colleague, a family member, read your draft and give you feedback. For the most part, I would advise not having your mother read your essay because one of two reasons. One, your mother will be way more nitpicky than your instructor and will get out her red pen and there will be this contention between you and your mother. And this also goes for spouses. Or two, your mother will think everything you've done is wonderful and doesn't need any fixing because you are her child and close to her heart and she just can't see any fault in you. So, when you have someone else read your essay, you want to find someone who's going to give you some good, strong feedback. Okay? Now, let's talk about tone. APA format is direct and concise, but it doesn't need to be boring. I had a student last semester that was having a difficult time choosing his topic for his essay because he had a topic in mind, but he didn't know if it fit the academic writing genre. And so he said, I guess I'll just write about this topic. And he wasn't excited about it and he was struggling. And so I asked him, I said, well, what topic did you want to write about originally? And he said, my girlfriend, her family, like I've been with this girlfriend for 4 years now, and her family is struggling. The mother was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago and just passed away this past year, and the family's just struggling. They had such a hard time when she was diagnosed, and they've just never been able to get on their feet since then. And he said, I really wanted to write about the effects of cancer on families and to see if there's some solutions and some help that's available for families. And he had such a passion as he spoke about these things. And I could feel his emotion and I could feel how important that topic was. And it was a lot different than when he said, well, I guess I'll just write about this. And he did not feel it. And part of his problem was in his mind, he was thinking, it can't be interesting. It has to be very scientific. It has to be this, but it doesn't. It doesn't have to be boring. And so he went and wrote about that first topic and he backed up everything with research and he wrote a powerful essay because it mattered to him and then he made it matter for the reader. So make it interesting by writing with style. You want to avoid being combative. Like you're not trying to pick a fight here. You want to keep a professional tone at all times. Your audience awareness is the key for this. The APA manual recommends to imagine a specific reader you are intending to reach and write in a way that will educate and persuade that individual. Picture someone you are familiar with and write to that person. So you just want to make sure your tone is formal because this is an academic formal essay, but it's not boring, it's not dry, and you want to make it interesting. And you don't want to pick a fight, right? You don't want to say, hey, listen up, dumb people. This is what I have to say. Okay, you're going to turn your audience off and they're not going to read your essay. All right, let's talk about economy of expression. And here are just some examples of redundancy. For example, this took me a minute to see this, but ATM, it in itself, M stands for machine, and so ATM machine is redundant. Or vegetarian vegetable soup is a little bit redundant also. So be frugal with your words. Cut out elaborations, irrelevant information, redundancy, jargon, evasiveness. All right, you're not trying to write the next Sherlock Holmes mystery, okay? You don't want to lead your reader on and keep them guessing. They don't want to be guessing. They want to know what's going on right from the beginning, and they want you to be very transparent and concise. Shorter words and sentences are easier to comprehend. If I have to stop and get out my dictionary to look up every other word in your essay, I'm not going to enjoy reading it, and I'm going to lose the message. Here are just a few examples of redundancy. These are just common examples. Exactly the same. You could just write the same. If you say, the two children were exactly the same, you could just write the children were the same. Okay, because that's what same means. A total of 68 participants. You could just write 68 participants. 4 different groups were tested. You could just say 4 groups were tested. Do you kind of see the redundancy in these? People mostly assume that the groups were different, or why would you have 4 groups, right? One and the same. Again, just write the same. The reason is because. That's what because means, is the reason. So you can find more examples in your APA manual. So also, you want to look at precision and clarity. Make certain that every word means exactly what you intend it to mean. Sometimes this means going through your essay with a fine-tuned comb, looking at every word to make sure that it's saying what you want it to say. And I like to think of it as your ideas, your main ideas, your supporting ideas, your sentences, your paragraphs, your words should be fighting for the right to be in your essay. It should be a very exclusive club. Sorry, idea, you just don't make the cut, okay? Sorry, words, you're redundant. I'm going to have to kick you out. It should be a fight for these words to stay in your essay. Avoid colloquial expressions. For example, write up instead of saying report. So the scientist did a write up instead of saying the scientist did a report, because it may mean something different for different people. For example, for me, a write up would be a negative thing that you would get from an employer if you broke a rule. Also avoid quantity approximations. I'll be there in a while could mean something different to different people. For example, if my husband says I'll be there in a while, or if I say I'll be there in a while, there is a huge time difference between that, okay? So also avoid jargon. Be aware of your audience. Your audience, your instructor, for example, may not be familiar with medical jargon. Just what I've learned on Grey's Anatomy, right? So if you use a medical term, be sure to explain it the first time. If you use a big complicated term that only a specified field of study would know, you better define that for your audience or explain it. Or if you have a complicated process, explain it in more common terms and help your reader understand it more clearly. You can't assume that they're just automatically going to understand what you're talking about. Watch for pronoun confusion, especially the troublemakers, this, that, these, and those. And avoid ambiguous or illogical comparisons. From the APA manual, 10-year-olds were more likely to play with age peers than 8-year-olds. So what does this sentence mean? Does this mean that the 10-year-olds were more likely to play with other 10-year-olds than 8-year-olds are likely to play with other 8-year-olds? Or does this mean that 10-year-olds prefer to play with kids their own age rather than with 8-year-olds? It's confusing. So you want to make sure that you don't have any ambiguity. You want to make sure that it's all very clear what you're trying to say. And don't give animals or inanimate sources human characteristics. This is actually something I struggle with, and I didn't realize it until looking over some of my writing. Like, okay, I cannot give that inanimate object, a human characteristic. So instead of saying the report said, I would say something like, because the report doesn't actually talk. So according to the report, and look, I've even cut out some of the words. So also avoid the editorial we and also you. These things can be a big turn off for your audience and can be distracting or offensive.
So if you say something like, we must do better at taking care of our environment, that is the universal editorial we. And it can be offensive in some ways. For example, if I'm already doing everything I can, I recycle, I walk instead of drive, I power my home with only solar power, I'm doing all these things, and then you tell me that we, including me, need to do more, I might feel kind of offended about that. Well, I'm doing all these things. Give me some credit here, right? And so you want to avoid using we, and that usually makes for universal statements, which you want to avoid. And I know I'm using you right now as I talk to you because I am talking to you. But in your writing, you want to avoid saying you should do better. It makes the reader feel defensive sometimes when we say you this, you that. Um, so just avoid it. And also, we prefer third person pronouns in academic writing anyway. So he, she, they, it. All right. Linguistic devices. Anything that takes attention away from your main ideas needs to be avoided. Alliteration, that's where everything starts with the same letter. Rhyming, poetic expressions, metaphors, and cliches. No need for the fancy stuff. In all things, don't go overboard. Use figurative expressions and colorful expressions sparingly and only if they add to your writing. I remember a few semesters ago, I had a student who was writing about, I believe it was the keto diet. And I was actually very excited to read her essay because I've heard some things about it. I have relatives who swear by it. I wanted to read a good, strong, research based essay about the keto diet. However, this student, the way she wrote the essay came off as an infomercial, or not even an infomercial, but like a commercial or an advertisement for the keto diet. And there was a lot of exclamation points and you should try this at home kind of tone to it. And it was very off putting because that's not what I was looking for. I didn't want another advertisements. I've heard enough advertisements. I wanted solid research based information. And so, and on that note, do not use exclamation points in your final essay. Um, a lot of times, exclamation points are considered as yelling or a little too excited for academic writing. So, technically, my one bullet here should be yelled in it. It should be yelled when you read it. No need for the fancy stuff, right? So, just avoid using exclamation points. But just, you can use some things a little bit. You're the writer, you get to make those decisions, but don't let it be a distraction. Don't take away from your message by using too much flowery language or by using um, too many metaphors and things like that. And I am not only do I do academic writing, but I like to write fiction. I like to write poetry. And so when I first started writing academically, that was difficult for me to kind of give up some of these things. But you can make your writing interesting and you can make it smooth and you can make it a pleasure to read for your reader without going overboard on figurative expressions and colorful expressions and things like that. All right, so that is the presentation for today. Good luck as you go through your essay. Look at all these different things. Look at your paragraphs, look at your words, look at your sentences, and examine your writing a little bit closer to see if what you're saying is being said in the most effective way possible. Good luck. Thank you.